Good morning, friends of the media. Welcome to this press briefing. The Chief Executive will first speak, and then the floor will be open for questions. Please wear a mask at all times and observe social distancing. Chief Executive, friends of the media, Hong Kong citizens, good morning. Yesterday, over 100 confirmed cases were recorded in Hong Kong. So let me first brief you on the latest epidemic situation. Of the 107 confirmed cases, this figure represents the first day since early December when we recorded over 100 cases. And of these cases, 102 are local cases, with 46 of them being untraceable. This shows that we still have transmission chains across the territory. So what we need to do now is to join hands and curb the transmissions as soon as possible. In this wave of the epidemic, in terms of curbing the transmission chains, the government has stepped up its effort on various fronts. But of course, in the light of the latest situation, we need to follow up on a number of areas. Our enhancements include the exercising of the powers delegated under Cap 599 to compel certain persons and groups to conduct tests in terms of problematic buildings and other clusters. Repeated testing can be performed. In relation to higher risk groups, such as residential care homes and their staffers, we have been conducting regular testings, and I believe that we're already in the 5th round. In relation to persons and buildings subject to compulsory testing, the other area of our work includes inspections, so that we can check and verify if the persons and buildings concerned have been duly receiving tests according to the compulsory testing requirements. And if necessary, we will spare no effort in evacuating residents in the whole building or certain residents in the building. Take yesterday as an example. Professor Yuen Kwok Yung paid a site visit, and then residents living in Unit 1-3 below the 12th floor of Wah Fong House in Chai Wan, Hiu Fong House, Fong Wah Estate, were evacuated. As for the threshold for issuing compulsory testing notices, the previous criterion was 4 units with unlinked cases. The threshold had been lowered to 2 units, and because of the recent outbreaks in Yau Chi Mong area, within the specified area, we have further revised the criterion so that as long as 1 unit has a confirmed case, the whole building will be subject to compulsory testing. With technological advancements, the government has been collaborating with the experts team in Hong Kong U in conducting sewage surveillance tests, and following the test results, enforcement action will be taken. In fact, announcement will be made later on today for more buildings to be included in the compulsory testing notice as long as the virus has been found positive in sewer tests for more than 3 consecutive days. And we've also expanded the mandatory testing, including 300,000 foreign domestic helpers, 500,000 construction workers, as well as couriers. We would encourage them to be tested. Since late November, at the onset of the current wave, we already tested 2.1 million people, and we want to bring out this message. Indeed, we recorded over 100 confirmed cases yesterday, and it really sparks a lot of concerns whether the situation is worsening. But according to our experts' analysis and overseas experience, when the testing capacity is enhanced in a certain place, what follows is inevitably an increase in the number of cases. For example, 55 cases identified yesterday actually came from mobile testing stations and testing centers. And we also have over 30 to 40% of these cases without symptoms. So imagine if we do not have mandatory testing in place, a person without any symptom may not just go to a test center for a test. So let me reassure the public not to panic. What we need to do now is to identify these cases as soon as possible for the confirmed cases to be isolated and treated. We also need to make sure contact tracing is done to prevent the spreading of the virus. Last week, we set up an office for contact tracing. It's now in operation and yielding result. As I mentioned today, we need to step up our effort in conducting tests on a mandatory and voluntary basis. Later on today, the Food and Health Bureau will be announcing additional measures. For example, in the specified area in Jordan and Yau Ma Tei, we have identified some buildings in this core area where the environment is quite undesirable. These buildings are the 3-nil buildings, and as a result, within this specified area in Jordan and Yau Ma Tei, we will be designating a core zone, and every resident living in these buildings in the core zone will be required to be tested on a mandatory basis. In other words, the building will not be listed as one of the buildings for compulsory testing when a unit is identified as having a confirmed case. At the moment, the departments and bureaus are joining hands in identifying these buildings. I believe that the number will be quite significant. Second, in Jordan and Yau Ma Tei, for buildings outside this core zone, the same threshold still applies. That is, compulsory testing will be required if one or more confirmed cases in a unit is identified. At the same time, we will continue with sewerage surveillance tests. Even if no case has been identified in a building, if the sewer test result returns positive, the whole building will be subject to compulsory testing. Later on today, we will be announcing 2 such buildings to be included. In other words, the surveillance team has identified positive test results in the sewage of 2 buildings in the past 3 days. The third measure is that in relation to the testing method for buildings in Jordan and Yau Ma Tei, especially when the problem is more serious, we will be extending the same arrangement to other areas or districts. Now, if buildings within this specified area has 1 or more confirmed cases in the unit in the past 14 days, it will be subject to compulsory testing. Now, the arrangement will be extended to Sam Shui Po, and the Food and Health Bureau will be making announcement in due course. All in all, we'll be stepping up our effort in testing and identification so that we can identify confirmed cases as soon as possible and to curb the transmission chains. In light of the current epidemic, I think we're all prepared. The series of social distancing measures to be expired by midnight Thursday will be extended. And again, later on today, the Food and Health Bureau will brief you on the details. As I mentioned last week, we have heard very strong views from the sectors. They propose, instead of a broad brush approach regulating all premises in the same way, a more precise and targeted approach should be taken so that we could address the needs of the public in their daily activities and to alleviate the burden on the sectors. We have asked the bureau chiefs and department heads to put their heads together and further discuss the possible options with the industries. In the same vein, earlier we announced that the market for Lunar New Year will be cancelled. However, we consider at the same time the needs of the public in holding certain activities during Lunar New Year, and the fact that if we cancel the flower market for Lunar New Year, there might be crowds gathering elsewhere, and hence there will be some new arrangements in relation to the Lunar New Year market. And we'll be discussing with the stakeholders, and announcements will be made in due course. Starting from tomorrow, for 3 days, the Legislative Council will hold a debate on the Policy Address 2020. For quite some time, we have been placing our focus on the anti-epidemic work of the government, and hence members of the public may not have a full grasp of the 200+ measures or initiatives in the policy address. So this afternoon I will be writing to the President of the Legislative Council to explain the progress achieved in relation to these initiatives in the policy address, so that members could offer their valuable views on the policy address.
Now we're open for the questions, and state the media represent and speak through the microphone. In the back row, the reporter in black. Carrie, Cable News. Good morning, Mrs. Lam. And on the epidemic, you mentioned that in the specified area of Jordan that you will create a core zone. Have you taken the expert suggestions that in the Yamate Jordan have multiple cases? Would you consider to perform compulsory testing for the Yamate Jordan entire area? We have interviewed the public. They don't know which are the voluntary testing and which are subjected to compulsory testing. The information is limited for the elderly that rarely go out and for the ethnic minorities, for example. Would you consider compulsory testing for the entire district so to give some uniformity? Another question area, and the foreign press reported that Beijing will have introduced great reforms to the Hong Kong political system. And Leung Chen-ying said that selecting the chief executive through consultation is not illegal. Do you agree? And for the basic law principles to achieve universal suffrage by gradually, would you see this approach as going backwards? Thank you for your question. And it's undeniable that more testing would help us to identify the cases early, especially the asymptomatic cases, so we can arrange them to quarantine and conduct contact tracing and reduce transmission risk. In the course of fighting the epidemic, we have to take into account of the reality of implementation, our capability, and what will be the results. With the Central People's Government support and the help of technology, today our laboratory testing capability have been greatly enhanced. And for a daily single-tube testing capacity is around 100,000. At the same time, we stressed that the test should be done through professionals, and we arranged the public could get sampling at this sampling points. As for when and where the test can be done, we need to make a difficult decision. For example, the testing capability on the sampling locations and so on. We have to allocate it in an area where it counts. And just like I mentioned about the sewage surveillance program, I very much hope the Environmental Bureau and the Hong Kong U team can conduct sewage surveillance all across Hong Kong so that we can get an idea of the sewage discharged to check for antivirus and so on. After some discussion and allocating more manpower and even assuring that resource is not a problem. And now the daily sampling of sewage and testing at the Hong Kong U laboratory, and they could get the results of the next day. We're able to conduct 20 samples, collect 20 samples from manholes. Therefore, we concentrate our effort in Yau Ma Tei in Jordan District. That doesn't mean and Yuen Long, Sam Shui Po, and Kowloon City don't require this. We have to set our priorities. The second question on the Hong Kong political system. I'm holding up the basic law on Article 45. It said quite clearly that how we should develop our political system. Yes, that's the sentence you mentioned to exist, that the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall be selected by election or through consultations held locally and be appointed by the Central People's Government. The reality is, since the unification, the past chief executive were selected by elections. I personally have led a reform drive on the election method for chief executive back in 2014-15, and also I have run a CE election myself. Whether from the history perspective or for the impact an election will bring to the society, an election of the chief executive will be more appropriate. Well, selected through consultation, this line to exist in the basic law. Therefore, I can't say this is against the basic law. Well, actually, we need to amend the Schedule 1 of the basic law, which is Article Annex 1, which we need to go through a very stringent process. I'll be frank. Now that you ask me, now that we have the chief executive is elected by chief executive, it shall continue to do so. Well, we can only elect a chief executive, and in the course of the election, the candidates can explain to the public that how Hong Kong under the management have new expectations and policies and directions. In fact, the Central People's Government, since the reunification, have been very sincere to conduct elections for Article 24 and based on principle of gradual and orderly progress. And from the 400-person electoral committee to 800 to 1,200, and for the October 31st decision, that was a widely representative nomination committee would allow universal suffrage. The Central People's Government, for the implementation of Article 45 in a gradual and orderly progress to achieve universal suffrage, is plain for all to see. What happened? In fact, some Hong Kong individuals have obstructed the progress of democracy. A few years on, the Hong Kong actual circumstances is quite worrying. That's why there's quite be the same rationale that why we need to enact the national security law. When the Hong Kong actual circumstances have become quite risky or even endanger national security and threaten to full implementation of one country, two system. And as one of the CPG's action is fully understandable, as the Special Administration Region Government, of course, will fully cooperate. And the Chief Executive also responsible to the Central People's Government and the Hong Kong people. And at the same point in time, I have no specific details on how could we introduce changes. Next question. The reporter on the left.
From South China Morning Post. So on the rebound in infection of COVID-19, as the government extend the social distancing measures, apart from what you just suggested, would the government consider other measures such as financial assistance or relaunching measures to support employment? Yesterday, when health officials talked about the COVID-19 situation, they sort of suggested that the ethnic minorities' cultural background was put them at risk. So do you think that actually there's some sort of racial insensitivity in their remarks? Was the government's measure to blame rather than the ethnic minorities' background to blame? Secondly, you just talked about Hong Kong electoral reforms, but actually the MPCSC meeting from tomorrow will also talk about BNO and dual nationality. The BNO visa scheme will open for applications on January 31st, and a lot of Hong Kong people will be applying and moving abroad. So would the government do anything about it? And finally, as the government extends the oath-taking requirement to civil servants, do you think they will really take their oath genuinely, or actually a lot of them would rather quit the government? Thank you.
Thank you. There are three questions on different subjects. First of all, in light of the latest COVID-19 pandemic situation, it is quite obvious that there is no room yet for us to relax the social distancing measures that have been put in place and which will expire on Thursday this week. So I have already implied that they will be extended, but I will leave the Secretary for Food and Health to announce the exact measures and the duration of this round of extension of the social distancing measures. But at the same time, I fully understand the hardship on the various business sectors, especially those that have been required to close for more than or over 2 months now. So I have said that last Tuesday I said it here, and I repeated it just now, that I have asked my bureaus and departments to sit down and discuss with the various sectors on whether we could find more sophisticated means to enhance the infection control and to enhance contact tracing of the staff and of the customers, so that there could be a possibility for some resumption of business in due course. This is a piece of work that we will continue to do. Now, the Hong Kong SAR government has been rolling out financial relief schemes in the whole year last year. It was a heavy toll on the public finances of the Hong Kong SAR. So we have to be very prudent. At the moment, I understand we have no plans to extend the employment support scheme, and hence I can sort of foresee that the unemployment figures that the government is going to announce this afternoon will be bad. Because the ESS, which safeguarded employment and jobs, expired towards the end of November. So this afternoon's 3-month figures included the month of December. So one would expect that we are seeing more job losses and the unemployment figure will go up. Whether we would consider more financial assistance and other relief measures is a subject that we are listening to the public, Legislative Council members, because the Financial Secretary is embarking, or is, I think he's still doing, those consultation sessions on the 2021-22 budget, which will be delivered on the 24th of February. Now, you use the word blame. I really appeal to all of you that this is not an occasion to apportion blame. The COVID-19 pandemic is unprecedented, and we don't know enough about this disease And at the same time, there are so many intertwining factors that every government, every country has to consider. And they have been approaching it in different ways with different results. So I would not put any blame on anybody, and I hope the public will also not put the blame on the government. The government has tried its very, very best, mobilizing all the resources and people we could to tackle this pandemic. So there is absolutely no suggestion of the spread of disease relating to race or ethnicity. If there's any misunderstanding arising from any remark made by any of the government officials, I made it absolutely clear here. But since this disease is spread through human interactions and so on, social behaviors, living conditions, workplace hygiene are factors that will make certain people more vulnerable to catching this virus. So, but that has nothing to do with ethnicity. Now, the second question about BNO. The status of BNO is made very clear during the Sino-British negotiations before 1997, and by an explanation from the National People's Congress Standing Committee before the reunification, that the BNO is a form of travel document. It is not a form of nationality. If one side, and that is the UK government, tries to deviate from that mutual understanding and bilateral agreement, then of course it's legitimate for the other side, that is the Central People's Government, to consider any countermeasures. And the Hong Kong SAR government will of course support any countermeasures to be adopted by the Central People's Government. At the moment, I have no details to offer except to assure the people of Hong Kong, because the great majority of people in Hong Kong, even if they are holding a BNO passport, they are Chinese citizens. At the same time, probably in possession of a Hong Kong SAR passport, of which there are 5.8 million passports in circulation, and they also enjoy the right of abode in Hong Kong, which gives them the various rights as enshrined in the Basic Law. Now, oath-taking is a very solemn matter. It is necessary for all civil servants, in fact, public servants, to take the oath in order to demonstrate that under one country, two systems, they fully understand that they need to swear allegiance to the Basic Law and be loyal to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. But your question is very interesting. Whether a civil servant or any person in taking the oath is genuine, I don't think I have an answer for that. So ultimately, the test lies in the behavior. If somebody who has taken an oath to swear allegiance and pledge loyalty has subsequently done something which is in breach of the oath, then appropriate actions will have to be taken by the authorities. Thank you.
Last question for the day. The reporter on the right-hand side, Mrs. Lam, Now TV. My question is this. In Yau Ching Mong, apart from compulsory testing, will the government heed the advice of experts and impose a lockdown because of the yet mentioned small precinct? The figure came down to 0 in the end, but it seems that the practice hasn't been repeated. And according to many legislators, the government should set up an unemployment support fund. What is the government's consideration? Are there ways to help the unemployed? Finally, for oath-taking by civil servants, according to some unions, some civil servants are concerned and they may refuse to sign the declaration. Will this pose any impact on the government's operation or the morale of the civil service?
Thank you. Three quite different questions. First, you mentioned the Yatming Estate enforcement action. We'll continue to take enforcement action. In other words, that buildings subject to compulsory testing we will conduct enforcement action that in a specified period, we will check the residents of the building to see whether they have been tested. Especially, we have streamlined the arrangement where that we give SMS notifications of a negative test results. This work will continue. Even though you have yet to see this intensive enforcement work as in Japanese State, the Home Affairs Department is on it. They will mobilize a lot of their staff to provide door-to-door knocking and check against their information and to prepare for future enforcement actions. Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government attitude on certain kind of employment assistance, we have stated our position and have been consistent that in Hong Kong's case, this is difficult to implement and also involved a substantial amount of public money. When helping the underemployed and employed, we are offering plenty of assistance programs and on the different levels. Besides the Employee Training Board Love Upgrading Scheme, we also provide subsidies for the working families. So long as they're working, we will try to offer assistance. I've heard some views that it's quite a high threshold for the working family allowances in terms of the working hours. Therefore, I'm working with the Labor and Welfare Bureau that in such critical time that where the threshold of the working family allowance can be lowered. So those who are working on casual jobs with not that many hours are eligible for working family assistance. Of course, which will indeed would create more employment opportunities. Well, besides the government, the Construction Industry Council have also dug into in reserves to create more positions, or whether training positions or on-the-job training positions to provide employment opportunities. We will continue with this work. Third question, on the civil servants oath-taking. We request the civil servants oath-taking as a condition of appointment. When you are recruited, you need to support the Hong Kong SAR government and support the implementation of basic law and one country, two system. And asking them to sign a declaration or to take an oath is not something extra, but rather as part and parcel to allow them to acknowledgement of the public expectations. And since last July, it was applicable to the new recruits, and over 4,000 new recruits were more than happy to sign the declaration. As for whether there are one or two appointees who are aware of this requirement, well, we just issued an offer to them. In such kind of cases may be very, very rare. As we see that there were over 4,000 new recruits had already taken the oath. Therefore, taking the oath and the signing the declaration would affect the civil servants' morale. In fact, the recruitment of civil servants besides the police and the correctional service department, we haven't come across any major problems, especially against the backdrop of high employment. Plenty of university graduates and other professionals hoped to join the government's ranks. Therefore, I don't see there's any direct connection with the civil service morale. If some of the civil servants or unions have other views, I'm sure the Secretary for Civil Service is more than happy to talk to them. Thank you.